And welcome to Gamcast Week in Review for May the 1st. I believe it is May the 1st, 2022. This is the podcast where we cover all of the stories of the week in reverse chronological order. So if you have tuned in, you are going to see all of everything that's going out. Hopefully the volume is good. Let me do this while I'm thinking about it. Let me pull up an application here that will tell me if the volume is good. 1 second. Gotta go there. Boom. And then we'll be able to tell me now. Yeah, it's taking longer than it should. Here we go. All right, so see if the volume is okay. The volume is not too bad today. Let me pull the microphone a little closer. So let's get right into it. Again, this is the podcast, and I will put a link in about the stories and where you can find us on Twitter and things like that in a moment. But this is the podcast where we cover what we think were the biggest stories of the past week, the week in review, if you will. And without further ado, let's go ahead and start with that. So the week ended. Again, we're going in reverse chronological order. It's been a while since I've been out on, so I'm a little bit out of practice here. But the week started, as it were, with President Biden ranching up the things that he's going to do in Russia and Ukraine. And this was a clip that a lot of people played, and I don't really understand why people played it, because to me, it didn't strike me as what it struck other people for. I thought the story of this tweet was something different. Why don't we go, or not this tweet, but this announcement by Biden. Why don't we take a listen to it, and I'll tell you what I thought about it here in a moment.
We're going to seize their yachts, their luxury homes, and other ill-begotten gains of Putin's kleptocracy. Kleptocracy and the guys who are the kleptocracies.
Now, a lot of people laughed at that, and the story for them was that Biden can't pronounce the word, or he's getting confused, and he's more and more senile. To me, that's really not the story. To me, the story is a couple things. One, that's against the Geneva Convention. You can't just seize people's property because they happen to be a part of a company or country that is somebody that you don't like. That's just not something that you can do. I don't really understand why people don't seem to understand that. Of course, I've lost a fair amount of followers, it seems, on my podcast and maybe even from my Twitter feed for basically calling what the Ukraine-Russia conflict, what it is, something we shouldn't be involved in, and just an excuse to basically excuse the Biden administration for its failures and, for example, with respect to inflation, and then to make money off sending them arms. But getting back to this point, you can't just seize the property of people because they happen to be a member of a country that you don't like. I mean, that's just simple, basic American law. And it seems to be that we always understood that. But as per usual, the left doesn't understand anything about the American experience or how it's supposed to work. And so when they don't follow the rule of law, they seem to get away with it. And I think this is just another example where people are mistakenly allowing them to do something they shouldn't do. And just before we move on to the next story, the other big part of this story, at least as I see it, is that they're going after the Russian oligarchies now, or the kleptocracy, whatever he's calling them. They're going after them now. And that's always the way the left does it. They go after somebody extremely unpopular first. So, for example, on Twitter and on YouTube and some of the other big tech, they went after people like Alex Jones. Right? They got rid of Jones, and eventually they got around to Trump, and then after they got around to Trump, then they got around to Libs of TikTok, and then they got around to some other people, Carpy Duncan and others. So to me, this was a big story, not for the fact that Biden obviously has some dementia, some mental issues, which I really hate to say that, but it's true. But it's really a big story for how he's ratcheting up the war in Ukraine. So the next big story of the week, I don't think a lot of people covered this. We covered it on our podcast, and this was a pretty fascinating story. We're going to dig into it a little bit. This is CNN talking about Biden losing the black vote. Let's listen to it beginning. I'm not going to play the whole thing because it's too long, but here's Harry Eaton, who used to be at 538, talking about Biden's troubles. Take a listen.
It's not just inflation that's challenging President Biden before the midterms. There's another potential headwind. New polling suggests that black voters may be souring on Democrats. CNN's senior data reporter, Harry Enton, is here. Harry, great to see you.
Nice to see you.
So you have found that Biden's approval with black Americans is down. How far are we talking here?
I mean, it's really down. I mean, you can see it here. At the beginning of his term, he was at 87%. Look at where he is over the last few months. 67%. That's a 20-point drop. And not only is it a 20-point drop, that's 67%. Barack Obama, the last Democratic president, never dropped below 75% in any Gallup poll. So this is lower than Barack.
Okay, so we get it. So basically, if you want to follow this story, you see the headline there. You can go over to CNN and check it out. Here's where I think it really gets interesting is when he tries to basically he puts it in historical perspective. There you see he's talking about the fact that the congressional vote, which is going to come up in November, the Democrats won the black vote by 77, 91, 87, 81, and 75 points. And now they're down into the 67s. So the really important part of this bit, I'm going to pick it back up here. Basically, he just goes through historically to show that no one's ever been this low. No Democrat president has been this low with black voters until Biden. And then he gets to this part, and this is the humorous part to me. Take a listen.
And four. Now, you were asking before, why? What is driving this erosion? And this, I think, will give you the clue. It's black conservative voters. Black conservatives. Look at that. 2016, Dems won him by 58 points. Hillary Clinton. Look at that. Just a 20-point margin for Joe Biden. All others, moderates and liberals, that 87-point margin held. It's black conservatives that are driving this.
Really helpful, Harry. Great to see you.
Nice to see you.
So anyway, really helpful, Harry. Yeah, right. Here's the funny thing about that. There are no black conservative voters. There haven't been any black conservative. Well, I'm not going to say there's not black conservative voters. I mean, I think if you look at that, the plus 87 margin, plus 80s or whatever, you're looking in, getting 94 to 6 or, 91 to 9 or something like that. Those are the types of margins you're talking about. So if there were any quote unquote black conservatives, they were already in the Republican camp. They were the 9%. I think Trump ended up getting 16% of the black vote in 2020. So he went after the black vote a lot. And we're going to work on a story on our Substack page. You can find us. I'll put in the description when I get done with this. I'll put a link in. But it's GreatAmericanMail.substack.com. We're working on an article. There is a record number of blacks and people of color, Hispanics, Asians, etc., running for office under the Republican banner this year. Of course, the mainstream media doesn't talk about it because they don't want you to know about that type of thing. But anyway, getting back to Eaton's point, is there's no way that the erosion on the Democrat side is from so-called black conservatives, because they would have lost them before Biden, right? The fact that they're losing them under Biden has a lot more to do with the fact that the Republican Party is very swiftly, and I didn't think it would happen this quickly. Trump started it and it's accelerating. They are quickly becoming the party of the middle class. For blacks, for Asians, for Hispanics, for anybody. The party of the middle class now is the Republican Party, and the Democrat Party is increasingly becoming the party of elite leftists and communists, and some persons of color. I mean, obviously still a majority of black voters, but it's decreasing rapidly as they've turned away from middle class values and the rule of law. And so Biden has just accelerated that. And it's interesting because, Obama did actually, he started in 2008, this trend, but he did it cautiously. He didn't realize how far he could go. And Biden has just come in and been sort of overtly in your face about these leftist policies. And they are not popular with, black voters that are, middle class oriented, that just want a fair shot like anyone else to get ahead and want to be rewarded based on their merit and want to be judged not by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. The basic Dr. King model. And that's what Biden's going on there. So the other big story of the week, make sure I get this right, I'm going in the right direction here. So the other big story, seizing yachts, we got CNN. So Elon Musk tweeted this midweek or so. It may have been late in the week. And you can see from the graph here, it's very interesting stuff. And it's again, Elon Musk has about 68 million followers on Twitter or something, some incredible amount. And you can start to see as he's become more involved and more part of the conversation as he did last week and the week before about purchasing Twitter. But he made some comments this past week about the Democrat Party being the party of extremists. And you see here that in 2008, you've got the right, you've got the center, you've got Elon Musk putting himself left of center, which I think is true. And then you've got, the fellow liberal, which is left of him, but he's not far left. Then he sees in 2012, they ran hard to the left. And then at the end, you see here in 2021, he's got himself now sort of center right because the center has been moved and the left has been moved, okay? And this is unquestionably true, but a lot of people lost their minds about this meme. And you saw the mainstream media, the main hoax media, it just went into full mode trying to debunk this. And a couple of people sent out several things. There are lots of tricks leftists will do about this. One is they'll point to one or two Republicans who might be a little bit out there and say they represent the whole party, which obviously is easily debunkable. The next thing they do is a little bit, I should have probably brought it up, but we've got to get a lot in. And this show tends to run approximately an hour. I don't know how long we're going right now. Let me take a look here. We're approximately 10 minutes in. So there's only so much we can do. But one of them was a Pew study, I believe, that looked at Congress over the last 20 or 30 years, and it demonstrated that Republicans had moved more to the right than the Democrats had to the left. There's a couple of problems with that study you have to understand. First and foremost, they're looking at the unanimity of the party being able to pass legislation, which is in no way reflects what the party does or doesn't do. It just doesn't make a lot of sense, right? And in other words, if you wanted to know what the Democrat Party was all about, you couldn't just look at all the legislation because a lot of it's got to go through the Senate. Right? So you'd have to look at not the things that passed, but the things that were proposed and various other things. The other little trick about that is they start around 1970. Now that should tell you a lot. If you start in 1970, who was the president of the United States at that time? It was Richard Milhouse Nixon. Now Democrats had good majorities in both houses, but that meant that they could not pass legislation because he was going to veto it, right? So they, at that point, were passing a lot of things that were just kind of a little bit out there. Plus, we also know that that was a time when the Democrat Party was almost at its leftist peak, right? Following the New Deal and following the Great Society of Johnson. So if you start at a sort of a peak leftism, and then they would go through a quote unquote little bit of a conservative phase. If you remember, Bill Clinton would form the Democrat Leadership Council in the mid 80s to try and fight back against some of that leftism. And then they wouldn't really make their way around again. Again, if you look at the graph here, right here, you see 2012. I'm going to tell you why that's such an important point in time in a moment. But they wouldn't make their way back around to all this leftism until around 2012, right? So if you looked at, in a circle from in the early 70s to the 2012, they did go to about from being left, going a little bit of a more not as left a phase, and then sort of they went back to it, right? The Republican Party, there's no question, they were more liberal in the 70s. Everyone knows that. I mean, people forget, if you have any friends that are on the left, most of them hate Nixon. I mean, as bad as they hate Trump, they hate Nixon almost, I'm not going to say more, but he's in the conversation. But if you find a few, and I've, through my career in college and in law school, I've met a lot of people who are left of center. And I can tell you, some of them, you get them and they'll go, Nixon signed a lot of really good legislation. He signed the Clean Water Act. He did a lot of things. He helped them pass the RICO law, which is now being used against Republicans. He did a lot of things that were very, very left of center. So don't think that that the Republican Party was as conservative in the 70s as it is now. So it's not really an apt comparison. Again, the easy thing about this, why is 2012 so important? 2012 is so important. And this is why, this is the interesting thing. A lot of people didn't talk about Elon's thing here where they started running to the left. 2012 was when Obama ran for re-election. And when Obama ran for re-election, he was in a tight spot. Obama is, in modern history, he is the first United States president to be re-elected by a smaller margin than he was elected the first time. And it's not even close. So why is that the case? Well, because he governed very left of center. He governed in a way very left of center that he did not run on, and the American people did not support Obamacare and some other things. And the party lurched left. And when it came time to win re-election, you'll recall David Axelrod, who was his campaign manager, his theory was to go out there and get his base to the polls. Now, how did he do that? Identity politics. He went and he pitched and he ran. If you go back and look at it, he went to black people and pitched things he was going to do for black voters. He came on TV in 2012 and came up with the quote unquote amnesty and the DACA and all that stuff for people who were here illegally. And basically he started hard charging down the identitarian politics that you see today that have flourished since then. I mean, we're 10 years later, and now identity politics is almost about everything for the Democrat Party. But Barack Obama started that in 12. And that's why you got away from unifying principles that you would see, even if they were leftist, they at least try to pitch the leftist idea to all people. Take, for example, the minimum wage. The minimum wage is a policy that applies to everybody equally. Now, I don't particularly think it's a good policy because I'm a libertarian and I'm a constitutionalist, but it's a left-wing policy that applies to everybody equally, right? If you look at the people that Obama's been appointing to the judiciary and all these things, he's clearly discriminating against whites, clearly white males. I don't think he's nominated a single white male judge. If he has, it's only one or two. And of the 65 or so he's nominated, almost all of them have been persons of color and women. So again, that's a leftist policy that's geared towards one identity group. It's not a leftist policy that's billed towards everyone. And that's why you're seeing the left now at the end, they're way over there calling everybody a bigot, because if you focus on identity, right, and we don't have a unified idea, it's easier for me to say you're a bigot for not favoring whatever my particular identity happens to be at that time. White, male, straight, whatever you want to put into it. And that's all basically goes back to Obama. So the other big story of the week, the next big story was sort of the Twitter crack up about free speech, because Elon Musk had said that he would likely open up the policy on Twitter. So what Elon Musk has said is essentially he's going to follow the rule that you're going to be, if his takeover is successful and if he's able to complete the buyout, he has said that his policy is going to be, if it's not illegal, it's okay. And so if you go to our Substack page, GreatAmericanMail.substack.com, again, I'll put a link in there in the description when I finish this. But if you go there, I've got a really good, 35-minute podcast on the First Amendment that will tell you some of the limitations of the First Amendment. Off the top of my head, they are time, place, and manner. The speaking torts, you do not have a right to defame people. The intellectual torts, you do not have the right to steal people's intellectual property, such as books, right? You do not have the right to incite people to violence. You do not have the right to put out child pornography and claim it's free speech. Okay, so there's certain limits on free speech that the Supreme Court has laid down, but they're very far and few between. And so what he said he's going to do is, as long as it's legal, then it's going to be okay on Twitter. Twitter obviously freaked out about that. In fact, I had them in the order I wanted to cover, but that's a little bit out of order, so we're going to cover this one first. So around the time that he announced this, the Project Veritas folks, and by the way, James O'Keefe, God bless, he does great work. If you want to see what real journalism, mudraking as they used to call it, you got to check out our friends at Project Veritas. So anyway, here is some leaked audio from internal discussions at Twitter. I want you to take a listen to this. And we're going to come back and talk about it here. So this starts off, I think, with the chief marketing officer, Leslie Berland. Anyway, take a listen to this and we'll talk about it. I'm probably going to split it up. It's about a minute. Probably split it up into 2 bites. Anyway, let's take a listen.
Elon made it clear in public that a large part of the reason he bought the platform was because of our moderation policies and disagreements in how we deal with health. This puts Twitter service and trust and safety, as well as anybody who cares about health on the platform, in a very difficult position.
I believe Twitter grows as a service, allows for more people to use the product and have a better experience, because we're able to make the conversation on Twitter be safe, because we have.
So let me break it up here. So she claims and he claims basically that Twitter needs to be a safe space. Okay. And it's interesting that what they define as a safe space is a space whereby everybody agrees with their particular point of view, right? And that what he's doing here is dangerous. And this is but one of a few of the freakouts that happen. So the interesting point there, of course, is that you have to understand the life these people lead. I mean, they literally get up. Imagine getting up every day and going into Starbucks or going into McDonald's or going into the office or going to Target or Walmart or wherever you do your shopping, Publix or Kroger or wherever it is. Imagine thinking to yourself, this is not safe. This is not safe. If there's speech here, I'm not going to be safe. That's literally the environment they work in. If they were able to reorder the world, you would not be able to go anywhere and say any of the things that you are able to say or do in society generally, because it's not safe. And so Twitter to them is like, one big romper room that they've created. Anyway, he continues, which was also sort of revealing. Take a listen to this.
Tools, processes for people to be able to feel safe and control their experiences. I believe that there is a lot of work we have to do to continue making that better. Sometimes that means more thoughtful moderation. Sometimes that means making things simpler. Sometimes that means changing product incentives to be able to solve problems through products sometimes instead of policies.
Elon made it clear.
So anyway, he there talked about content moderation. A couple things I want to cover. So first and foremost, content moderation is equal censorship. It's just a euphemism, okay? And they're basically saying we need to continue to content moderation. We need to alter content moderation. What he's saying there is they're not done yet. They still need to restrict the speech. Notice the spigot's not opening, it's closing. Okay. Now I talk about this a lot on the podcast and on the Twitter feed. And by the way, again, I'll put a link in there. You can find me at mail_American, but and it's MAIL, not MALE. But the interesting thing about this is I didn't look up Berland, but I did look up the CEO there. He's 37 years old. Now that may not sound like a lot, but go back to the graph. I don't have it up anymore, but remember the graph we just talked about where we had Elon Musk's little graph there about what had happened since, oh goodness, I've got the wrong one there, I think. What had happened since, I'll be able to pull it back up. So what had happened since Obama in 2012. So think about this. He was probably in school in 2012 because that would be 10 years ago. That would have put him at about 27, maybe a few years out of school, right? So his formative years were certainly from 2008, which would have put him about 23 years old. So he would have been just getting out of college. Almost his entire real sentient life in politics has been under the Barack Obama administration. So he doesn't have any respect for things like the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, any of these amendments. He doesn't have a tremendous amount of respect for any of them. And so it's interesting that he would go and talk about that. But, you know, you see there what he believes the environment should be. And it's a good thing that we're having this debate, and because a lot of things came out. First and foremost, that you know, Elon Musk wants to return us to the U.S. vision, which is if it's not illegal, you can say it. What's wrong with that? And obviously, I agree with that. But the other problem is against that, you've got people that say no. If you're not content moderating, right, it's not safe. And so a lot of people freaked out. I can only do so much on the show, but because it's supposed to be a condensed version of the week news of the week. But if you looked out there, you saw a lot of people that equated the content moderation or censorship with literal health, which shows you how scary some of this stuff is. So here's a bit here. This is Hakeem Jeffries, about ready to play here. And Hakeem Jeffries is, you may not know who he is. Hakeem Jeffries is in line to replace Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. Okay. Now, if he replaces her as Speaker of the House, things are only going to go in one direction. So I played this bit on the podcast for a couple reasons. This is him interviewing somebody who is basically explaining why the Democrat Party, and people have a problem with Clarence Thomas. But I want you to take a listen to it for a second. I'm going to let you hear the whole bit. I'm not going to interrupt it, okay? But when you listen to the whole bit, I want you to listen to this and understand. This is a precise example of what Democrats, people like Twitter, who believe in content moderation, right, instead of free speech, this is what they believe the conversation should sound like. Okay, take a listen.
Mr. Paoletta, you've echoed a similar sentiment. I think your quote is, "Many on the left hate Justice Thomas because he is a black conservative who has never bowed to those who demand that he must think a certain way because of the color of his skin." What evidence do you have to support that incendiary charge?
When Chairman Benny Thompson calls him an Uncle Tom because of his views on voter ID and affirmative action, when in fact more black Americans support voter ID and with respect to affirmative action in college education, they're 62% opposed to it. So that is the most vile, disgusting thing you can say. And so, yes, that's the evidence. That's the evidence I just gave you.
Reclaiming my time.
Yes.
There are a lot of vile, disgusting things that can be
Well, you just
said.
asked me for an example.
The notion that is, right, when some members on this side of the aisle and others have been called the N-word throughout different points of our life, belies the point that you have a particular bias. And it's an overstatement, which is not surprising when you look at the balance of your testimony. And if Chairman Benny Thompson has an observation to make, he's entitled to free speech. You apparently believe that Jenny Thomas, regardless of how many conflicts she has, is entitled to her own political opinions as well.
Can I give you another example?
No.
So it's interesting that that would happen. So there's a couple things going on in that bit that you have to understand. First and foremost, that is what Twitter thinks it should be, right? So he asked a dumb question, and then he got basically dunked on, essentially. So once he gets dunked on, then he's very, very upset. Okay, and so he basically then makes it all about race. I mean, he asks, what do you have to back it up? He gives what there is to back it up, that any rational human being would have understood, backed it up. And then he got angry, okay, first and foremost. Then he did the whole reclaiming my time thing. Now, folks, reclaiming my time is not a thing. It's never been a thing. The Democrat Party, as per usual, Pelosi is one of the many things that she did to sort of ruin Congress. And I don't really understand how it is that they get away with it. I know when when the Republicans take over, if they do in November, and if you've been following the podcast or the Twitter feed, we don't necessarily think that that's something that definitely will happen, but we shall see. But it's one of the things they need to get rid of, is this whole reclaiming my time. But again, it's just content censorship. That's all it is. Reclaiming my time means shut up. I don't want you to speak. So that's what Twitter will be like. And then you'll notice it says, can I give another example? So the question was, what examples do you have to back up what you say? He gave one, which destroyed Hakeem Jeffries. Then he asked to give another one. He can't do it. That's what Twitter will be. And you already see it in the mainstream media. That's what's going on. And so while I was talking there, sorry if I seemed distracted, but I had to pull up the bit that I accidentally got rid of. So this is Ari Melber. Again, all part of the Twitter freak out. Now, this one was particularly interesting because Melber here reveals the left, again, sort of lets the cat out of the bag where she shouldn't. So here he is reacting to Musk potentially owning Twitter, and then basically explaining that which they did last election. Take a listen.
You own all of Twitter or Facebook or what have you. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't even have to be transparent. You could secretly ban one party's candidate or all of its candidates, all of its nominees, or you could just secretly turn down the reach of their stuff and turn up the reach of something else, and the rest of us might not even find out about it till after the election. Elon Musk says this is all to help people because he is just a free speech, philosophically clear, open-minded helper. You own all of
anyway, I mean, you get the idea. So that just goes to show exactly what's going on with with the people that on reacting to Twitter and Musk and the whole, is that they're just angry. And again, this is something you have to understand. This is a leftist communist trait that one of the many that they have. But one of them is they are never satisfied. I mean, I don't want to steal from anybody, but Jesse Kelly says this all the time. I'm going to give him credit for it. That if the communists were in battle for world domination and there were 99 countries or 100 countries and they took over 99 of them and didn't get one, they would not go to bed that night going, geez, wow, we got 99 out of 100. Isn't that great? There's just one country out there that's not getting the benefits of communism. That's too bad for them. But wow, they would not look at it that way. They would go to bed seethingly angry that they didn't have that one country. Communism is for everybody. And you're seeing it right there with Ari Melber. He let the cat out of the bag. It's what they did in the election. But the other big thing that's interesting there is that he basically is angry that there might be one place where you have free speech. He can't stand it. They've already got all the alphabet networks. They got the New York Times. They got the Washington Post. They've got all of the mainstream outlets, every single solitary one of them. Okay. The only thing they don't own is a little bit of big tech, a small part of Twitter, right? And podcasts or live streams or whatever the heck you want to call this. Okay. That's it. And they're upset about it. So the other big story of the week, and we're about midweek now at this point, the other big story of the week was that Trump was held in contempt for failing to turn over documents to New York Attorney General Letitia James. Now, we covered this on the podcast, and I wanted to highlight a couple things because people that were not that are not lawyers or don't do legal stuff, it might have seemed like what Trump did here, Trump did something wrong. So basically, first and foremost, kept you out to understand things. I'm going to read a couple quotes from the judge, but so you have to understand how this works. So this is a subpoena. So when you issue a subpoena, this means this is to a non-party. It's Trump, it looks like in this case, because he sued the Trump Industries, or she sued the Trump Industries in a civil case, okay? And so if you're in a civil case, you have the plaintiff and the defendant. You can have multiple plaintiffs and multiple defendants, all fine. And between the parties, you can just ask for documentation, and you can just ask for depositions. You don't have to go through the subpoena process. So the first thing you have to understand is this has gone through a subpoena process, right? And depending on, I'm a lawyer in Georgia and Florida, but I've practiced all throughout the federal courts. I've practiced in New York where this is. I've practiced pretty much everywhere in the United States. But basically what you have to do for the subpoena is you have to get the clerk to issue them. And those are for parties who are outside of the legal process that you are in, the litigation. So this was for Trump. And Trump's lawyer said, hey, we've already given you everything we got. And a typical move here by somebody on the other side, it's called a discovery dispute, will try to say, hey, well, I believe there are documents that you haven't given us. And this is a common dispute that people have, right? Well, I think there should be documents. Well, we don't have any, right? That's just the way it works. And you just have to, if they don't have the documents, either because they never didn't preserve them or because they never existed, who knows? But one of the first things that about this story that should, well, I don't know the number here. Yeah, there it is. So the number is, if you'll see there in the second paragraph, you'll see right there that it's $10,000 a day. Now that should clue you off right there. That's a hefty fine if you think about it. I mean, that is about $3.6 million in a year, 365 days. That's roughly what the math would be. That's not a judge who's basically trying to go, hey, I really want you to get these documents. I mean, typically the first time this hearing would come up, you would get an order to do it. And then if you haven't done it by a certain time, the judge would say, look, all right, I'm serious. You got like 10 more days or whatever. When you start doing this quickly, this $10,000 a day thing, that tells you there's probably some bias going on. But the other big clue that there's some bias going on here is right here. You just get the quote from the judge, which I'm going to read. So it says, I feel like there's an 800-pound gorilla in the room. And that is, why don't we have an affidavit from him, Engeron, who happens to be the judge, later adding, this is a difference between saying something and saying something under oath. Now, let me explain to you how this works, just to show you, because again, this is, I guess, CBS News. It just goes to show you the alphabet networks don't do news anymore. Here's the way this works. If you subpoena something, right, and somebody comes back and they say, here's what I have or here's what I don't have. These are called document requests, right? They are not done under oath. The two things that are done under oath are depositions, which you can do, he could have done, and she will do, and interrogatories, which aren't relevant here because you can't send interrogatories to non-parties, and Trump's not a party to this, so it wouldn't apply. So what Letitia James could do if she wanted to get something under oath is she could go with whatever she has, subpoena him for a deposition, sit down and say, did you look for documents here? Did you look for documents there? What happened to these documents? Why don't they exist, right? He didn't do that. The judge is already talking about putting something under oath now. It's putting the cart before the horse, which is, again, that might have been the way Trump's lawyer handled it. She basically says, she searched here, she searched there, but she doesn't have to do that. This is an option. So there you have a judge intermingling himself into how a lawyer should conduct the case. I mean, she could do an affidavit, but she doesn't have to, right? And again, it being Trump, I would have argued not to do an affidavit. So again, this is a little bit of a cart before the horse, and you can see here that the judge is putting his thumb on the scale, trying to help out the attorney, in this case, Letitia James, who obviously ran on going after Trump. So anyway, I just thought this was an interesting story. It got a lot of headlines in the mainstream media because people hate Trump. There's really not much to see here other than there's just more bias from judges out there. But that bias might not have been as obvious if you were not trained in the law. So I just spent a little bit of time on the podcast. I spent a little bit of time here. And again, it just goes to show you that Trump is not getting he's not getting the rule of law. And again, backing up to the first story we covered about Biden and the kleptocracy, or whatever you want to call it, this is not a good thing because America is supposed to be the rule of law. One of the tenets of rule of law is the law apply. We know what the law is, A, it's clear, and B, it applies equally to all, right? And what the leftists are trying to do, or the Democrats are trying to do, is go, hey, here's somebody we don't like and some other people don't like. He doesn't get the rule of law. Once they get that established, then they'll come around, and we say it all the time. I mean, sooner or later, they're going to get to somebody you care about. They got to somebody I cared about from the very beginning because I'm a constitutionalist. But so the other big story, going back to the headlines here, was Kevin McCarthy got into some trouble, quote unquote. Now, these, I think this tape that I'm about to play, and I'm probably going to have to cut it up a few times, but the tape here, this is McCarthy, is apparently in the aftermath of January 6th. I believe it's either January 8th or the 10th. It doesn't matter. It's a phone call. Liz Cheney's on this call and some others. And basically, the McCarthy got into trouble for a couple of reasons, quote unquote trouble. First and foremost, he got into trouble because he had denied ever saying some of the things he's about to say in this call. I fault him a little bit for that. I don't know about the denials, and I'm not going to get into it because I really didn't research them carefully. And we're at a point now where I don't believe anything until I absolutely see it 100% with my own eyes. But even assuming he denied it and then later he's been proven wrong with this recording, doesn't bother me too much because it's not really a story that politicians take alternate sides depending on what's going on. But the interesting thing here also is it just goes to show how the media uses the quote unquote news as propaganda. So first and foremost, why is it really news that McCarthy or the leader of any party, the Democrat Party, the Libertarian Party, the Socialist Party, whatever, that they had internal discussions about something? I don't really know what it tells you other than it's just a smear job. But the other interesting thing about all this is a lot of this was happening in the heat of the moment. So if you'll recall back on January 6th now, about 15 months ago, I mean, a lot of us didn't know what was going on. I mean, a lot of us were caught off surprise and weren't really clear. What we know now and what we knew 15 months ago, what we didn't know 15 months ago is how they were going to treat the January 6th defendants. What we didn't know 15 months ago was they were going to have tens of hours of video footage that they have refused to release. We didn't know then that we know now that the FBI would, under oath, multiple times decline to say whether they had agents at the Capitol rally. So given what we know now and what they knew then, you know, Kevin McCarthy might have reacted the way that he did, just based clearly on what he understood to be the facts at the time. Anyway, it's important for you to hear it, so let's listen to a little bit of McCarthy talking to his own caucus there.
The thing I want to bring up, and I'm making some phone calls to some members. I just got something sent now about Newsmax, something Matt Gaetz said, where he's calling people's names out, saying an anti-Trump in this type of atmosphere. And some of the other places, this is serious stuff people are doing that has to stop. I'll make individual phone calls.
Mo and Louis' comments too. A lot of members have said some real concerning things about.
Did they say something? Did they say something today too?
No, I said Louis was at. I mean, Mo was at the rally. You know, we're kicking ass and taking names thing at the Trump rally.
So these are before they kick that ass.
Okay, what did Gaetz say?
Gaetz brought up Liz specifically. I just saw that on Twitter.
And Adam, someone just sent it. Gonzalez just sent it to me, so I'm calling Gaetz. I'm explaining to him. I don't know what I have to say, but I'm going to have some other people call him too. But the nature of what, if I'm getting briefing, I'm going to get another one from the FBI tomorrow. This is serious shit to cut this out.
Yeah, that's I mean, it's potentially illegal what he's doing.
Well, he's putting people in jeopardy, and he doesn't need to be doing this. We saw what people would do in the Capitol, you know, and these people came prepared with rope, with everything else.
So again, to me there wasn't much to see there, other than people now in hindsight. The other interesting thing about the story actually was not so much what McCarthy had to say, because in the heat of the moment, that doesn't surprise me that some people were kind of fooled by what had happened. But to me, the interesting part is you got to understand, they've had this audio. It probably was leaked from Liz Cheney. This is now the second time we've gotten audio on Kevin McCarthy coming out there. So the interesting thing to me is why in the world, if we've got this leak out there, how is it we just now finding out about it now? So really, I mean, they've had it for a while and they haven't gone with it. They picked the time. I don't know why they picked this time, probably because it's right before the primaries. Who knows? Who cares? But the fact that they've had it and they decided to use it now. But to me, it was really a nothing burger because, again, at the time, in the heat of the moment, a lot of people probably said a lot of things, believing things that were incorrect. So the midpoint of the week, Obama was sort of making news, and he made news because he basically came out and said that there's no need to have the First Amendment. This is sort of related to the big tech, Elon Musk taking over Twitter, but it's also kind of not related to that because Obama is sort of, he's one of these special people that he's made hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, he was poor when he ran in 2008. He's now made hundreds of millions of dollars. He's got a lot of cachet within the Democrat Party. And instead of pushing back saying, hey, folks, let's have free speech, let's have free exchange. Hey, Hakeem Jeffries, don't interrupt people reclaiming my time. Don't do that. People like Obama will not put any sort of speed bump on any of this. So here was Obama talking about the fact that the First Amendment doesn't apply and other things. Take a listen.
For more and more of us, search and social media platforms aren't just our window into the internet. They serve as our primary source of news and information. No one tells us that the window is blurred, subject to unseen distortions and subtle manipulations. We just saw a sitting president deny the clear results of an election and help incite a violent insurrection at the nation's capital. Not only that, but a majority of his party, including many who occupy some of the highest offices in the land, continue to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the last election and are using it to...
So I'm not going to let Obama, but you get the flavor. And so he went on like that. He was speaking, I believe, at the Obama Foundation. And, again, folks, I could get there and go back and say, hey, in 2016, Hillary did that. Stacey Abrams is running for governor where I'm sitting broadcasting from right now in Georgia, and she still hasn't conceded the 2018 election. I mean, the big story about that, a lot of people played Obama there talking about misinformation and spreading all these creeds and the need for content moderation, which is just censorship. But the real story there is that Obama not only will not help to put the fire out, he's actually pouring gasoline on it, which is just beyond sad. So the other big story of the week was that we're now at the beginning of the week. Taylor Lorenz was in the news, and she basically outed the name of the person that runs the Libs of TikTok. If you're on Twitter, you know about Libs of TikTok. It's basically just a person. She has an anonymous account. I have an anonymous account on Twitter as well, @mail_American, MAIL, not MALE. And it's no big deal. I mean, I could tell you the story behind it, but anyway. So she went and she outed this person. For a while there, they actually had the name and where the person worked. They eventually got rid of that. But to let Taylor Lorenz, the important thing was to out the person that does Libs of TikTok. And I'm going to let her explain here with Brian Stelter why she did it. And it's interesting. This story broke on Monday that she had outed the person, and she defends herself here. But also, she went afterwards, her and some of her colleagues went door to door to family members of the woman. So anyway, listen to Brian Stelter and Taylor Lorenz explain why they had to do that and try to basically dox this person. Take a listen.
Let's dig into it. I put the questions straight to Lorenz, and here's what she said.
Yeah, well, Libs of TikTok has been on my radar for a minute. I remember when Joe Rogan started promoting it last August. So I started following the account and looking into it, and I noticed that it was just gaining more and more traction. Like more and more high-profile people were retweeting it, engaging with it. And then earlier this year, when all of this groomer discourse really took hold, I started really, I was like, I got to find out who's behind this account and like what the deal is with this account, because it was this thing where like the account would post a video, and within 24 hours, sometimes it would be on Fox News or it would be written up in the whole right-wing media. And it was just this like feeding ground.
Were you all?
So, but before she goes on, it's interesting here to this point. So far to this point, she's now had 45 seconds, and she hasn't been able. She's explained why Libs of TikTok, the actual account, is important. I'll get rid of that. So if she wants to do an article on the account itself, hey, you know what, Taylor Lorenz, if you want to do one on the Great American Mail @mail_American, MAIL, not MALE, please, by all means, do. In fact, you can use my name if you want. But that I understand. I got no problem with that. Okay, and so far she's done a very good explanation of why Libs of TikTok is a story. Now, why the person behind it? Because and again, you have to understand what Libs of TikTok is, folks. It is merely just the person that has the site basically reposting crazy things that people put up on TikTok. That's largely what it is. There's little to no commentary at all. So again, she's explained why the account is important, but not why you got to let the news. So let's let her continue, see if she gets to the important point, which is why is the name important? Why is what that person is? Is she Christian? Is she Jewish? Is she Muslim? Why is that important?
Always determined to identify the person. Was that like the most important part of the story for you?
It wasn't I would say it was equally important with describing the power that this account has. I think it's rare to see an account gain so much prominence so quickly and be shaping these narratives in such an effective way, especially against trans people. So my story was kind of long, but I really wanted to make the case like why this account mattered. And I think it's incredibly important, as someone that...
Anyway, so I'm not going to let her continue because she's just lying. But, and again, it just shows what kind of person she is. she's the type of person, and she says when she started to pursue it that she thought it was equally important. Why in the world would it be equally important? Now, it could have been important. I mean, I can think there are reasons why it might be important to identify the person, right? If, for example, she was able to draw some nexus between that person's history or their profession or something they did, but she didn't do that. Basically, and the other problem is she says from the very beginning she wanted to know who it was. So that's just jealousy. She's just angry that the person has a feed that does things she doesn't like, and they're not shaping narratives. They're just basically pointing things out. But anyway, it wouldn't have been so bad. It wouldn't have been quite so bad if it weren't such a terrible article and that she weren't such a terrible person. But what really made the Taylor Lorenz story, and this kicked off the week, and then be the last story, and then we'll shut down the show, is that she had literally, folks, this I'm about to play you is on, I guess she's on MSNBC here. This is literally approximately a month, maybe 2 months ago. Take a listen to Taylor Lorenz describing being doxxed or, online. This is something she actually did to the libs of TikTok. Take a listen.
I've had to remove every single social tie. I had severe PTSD from this. I contemplated suicide. It got really bad. You feel like any little piece of information that gets out on you will be used by the worst people on the internet to destroy your life. And it's so isolating.
And terrifying.
It's horrifying. I'm so sorry.
Anyway, so it's really kind of sad that you have people like that in a position of power. It's even sadder that the Washington Post would give a platform to people like that. But again, that's her free speech right. She can do it. But again, you should know who you're dealing with. And so that is basically all of the news. Those were the main big stories. You're caught up to date on what happened this past week. So when you start off tomorrow morning, you will hear whatever the mainstream media has decided to feed us as the quote unquote news for the week. So anyway, if you like this podcast or live stream or whatever it is, please subscribe, tell friends. And again, I'll put some links in the description if you want to follow us on Twitter, you want to listen to the podcast, etc. And if you like it, I hope you tune back in next week.